Hello, everyone. By now, you should have downloaded the document that goes with this. And you'll see it looks a little different than other notes that I've given you. It's a table. The left-hand column has sometimes the name of the slide, or it might just have the topic and a focus question. So you should read that focus question, and that's kind of what I want you to think about as you're looking at the information on the slide or as you're watching a video. And you will write your notes in the right-hand box or right-hand column. So you'll look at the slides, you'll look at the information of the slides and put your notes on the right-hand column. There are some links to videos, and the links you'll see on the slides in this presentation, but you'll also see the links on your document. And you can just click on that, go to the video, watch it, and you write your notes in the right-hand column. And again, look at that focus question. So you know when you're watching that video, what is it that I want you to learn by watching it? So let's get started. And you can type your answers in, or you can handwrite it if you've printed the document. And feel free to pause the video so you have enough time to write. And you can also go back and re-listen to segments of it that you need. Okay, let's go. So this demonstration I have done earlier in class. And so just a reminder how little water we have that's usable, fresh water. So you look at our planet and we're the blue planet, the water planet. More than 70% of the planet's surface is covered in water. But how much of that water is actually useful for living things? So let's take a look at the percentages, and I want you to write it down on your chart. About 96.5% of the water on Earth is in the ocean. It's salty, and so it's not useful to plants and animals. In biology, we have a saying, salt sucks. So salt will cause water to move out of cells by osmosis. So will actually dehydrate you to drink salt water. About 1.7% of the fresh water is frozen in glaciers, and therefore it's not useful to us, is not available to us. Another 1.7 is underground. Some of it we can get to by digging wells and pumping it out, but a good portion of it is so deep we can't get to it. So that leaves just a fraction of a percent of fresh water that's available at the surface. And you think, my gosh, if we have such little fresh water available to us, you'd think we would treat it better, but we don't. Now, if you add that up, you'll realize that is not 100%. We're missing a little bit. Yes, we are. And that is also a fraction of a percent. Where is it? It's in the atmosphere, it's in the soil, and it's in living things. So I'd like you to really get a feel for just how scarce water really is. And this video, it's not online. We're going to watch it in class. So you might be watching this video before you've done the notes or maybe after, but we will watch it in class. It's a great video. I highly recommend the entire thing. We're going to watch a few segments of it. It's called Last Call at the Oasis. Let's take a look at how we use water. We measure the water we use in two ways. So one of them is water withdrawals. So you're temporarily taking it out and then you put it back in the source. So what am I talking about? That would be things like cooling a power plant. Power plants are always by water, a water source. So water is pulled out of usually a river and it helps cool the power plant, and then it's put right back into the river. It's warmer than it used to be. We call that thermal pollution, but it does go back in. We haven't used it. We've just withdrawn it for a short time. Now, water consumption is when you permanently remove water from the river, the lake. And so what's an example of that? Crop irrigation. And you pull the water out of, let's say, a river, and it gets sprayed onto the soil. The plants take it in. Some of it evaporates, some of it stays in the soil. So if you take a look at water withdrawal and consumption, how do we use that in the US? When we're looking at water withdrawal, a good part of it is for electric power generation. So remember from our last unit, you use something to heat up water and create steam, and that steam turns a turbine. And you need something to help cool the whole system. So that's water withdrawal. Irrigation and livestock is a big portion of it. Domestic, that's home use, and commercial, those would be businesses. And then industrial and mining is also a good part of it. When we're talking about water consumption, the vast majority of water consumption is agriculture, both plant and animal agriculture. When you look at domestic and commercial businesses, much, much smaller portion of water consumption. But what's happening is our demand for water is growing. Our population is growing. Many places are getting wealthier, so they consume more. They want more meat, which that it takes a lot more water to raise meat rather than growing vegetables. So worldwide, we're using more and more water. And the impacts of that are huge. So here's a video showing a lake in Iran and how much it changed over time from additional withdrawals of water because of increased demand. Here is Lake Chad in Africa from 1963 on. What a difference. This massive lake is no longer a lake, and that was from just massive water withdrawals. So when humans need more water, there are things that we do, and that's what we're going to look at through a series of slides and videos. How do we increase water supplies? One of them is groundwater. When we need more water, we will pump it out of the ground. So I'd like you to go to this link. It is in your notes, and watch this video and read the focus question. And that's what you're looking for as you're watching this video, and write your notes in the right-hand side, the right-hand column. Now, when we are pumping water, it leads to big problems. And I want you to realize that these problems are right here in California. They're not just in other parts of the world. So the Central Valley of California is where we grow the vast majority of our plants and also animals. And to make up for the lack of water, they are pumping water at extreme measures. So watch this video, again, read the focus question, and write your notes on the right-hand side. So it's not just California. If we're looking at the central United States, the high plains are expected to not be able to support any irrigation anymore. That will completely change how they do agriculture if they can no longer pump water from the aquifers. So another way that we increase our water supplies is by using dams. So there's a series of 3 videos that I want you to watch. The first one is a time-lapse video of a dam. And when you're watching this, I want you to really think about all of the materials that go into building a dam and the heavy equipment. To build a dam, just the building of it alone, think of the carbon footprint, the amount of carbon dioxide and other heat trapping gases that go into building the dam. And then once a dam is built, it has huge impacts on the environment. And that's what I want you to pay attention to as you're watching the mighty Colorado River. It doesn't meet the sea anymore. The change in the ecosystem because of all of the dams on the Colorado River, it is nothing like the ecosystem it used to be. And the last video I want you to look at on this slide, and it's all of these links are in your notes, that's looking at the number of dams in the US. So watch that, and you can see how many dams we have in this country. And each one has their own environmental impact. Now, there's a lot of problems associated with the dams, and that's what I want you to think about as you watch this video. So read the focus question and put your notes on the right-hand side. Another way that we meet our need for water is by rerouting water. And California has the most engineered water system anywhere in the world. Although China is building one, and when they're finished, if they can complete all their plans, they will have a more engineered water system than us. The California that existed before the first Spanish ship reached our shores was nothing like the California we have today. We have turned areas that used to be deserts, we've turned them into huge agricultural areas. And we have turned areas that used to have lots of water into deserts because we move the water where we want it to be. We move it to urban areas with lots of people and industry, and we move it to agricultural areas. And it's agriculture that uses the vast majority of the water. So when we're looking at California, our water project, it is huge. It's 1,200 miles of canals, 50 reservoirs, and 10 power plants. So it generates a lot of power from hydroelectric dams, but it also uses a lot of water, pumping the water to over mountains sometimes. If you've ever driven down I-5 to LA and you go over the Tehachapi Mountains, there is a huge pumping station there to get water to LA. So it uses a huge amount of water, of electricity, but overall, it generates more electricity than it uses. So to understand our very, very complicated system of rerouting water in California, there's this video. So read over the focus question and put your notes on the right-hand side. Another option for increasing our water supply is desalination and also conservation. So this video, it's a segment of Last Call at the Oasis we're going to watch in class. So let's take a look at domestic water use. And this is just a small fraction of the water that's used. In total, domestic is very small, especially compared to agriculture. But when you look at, what is it in homes, how do we use the vast majority of the water? Most of it is down the toilet. So there's a whole lot of ways we could conserve that. And then bathing, laundry and dishes, and drinking and cooking and brushing teeth. So let's take a look at a small segment of Last Call at the Oasis. Again, we'll have to watch this in class rather than you doing it on your own. So I'm sorry you might not be watching it at the same place as you are in the notes. So you might be watching this before or after you've taken the notes. There's this whole concept of virtual water. And what do we mean by that? Means the water that's used in the growing of a product, if it's an agricultural product, the manufacturing of the product. There's water used in just about every step. So we call that virtual water because it's not like you see water in a pair of blue jeans, but there was actually a whole lot of water that went into making those blue jeans. So this video will help you understand that better. So look at the focus question and write your notes on the right-hand side. Now, one of the things that humans do is we increase the chance of flooding. So some of our activities really cause a lot of problems. So when we remove vegetation from hillsides, then we can cause floods. So here's an example in Washington, with huge soil erosion as well. The area was clear cut, and then you no longer have the plants there holding the soil in place, but also slowing down the water. Because think that every raindrop that comes down, if it just hits the leaves and the branches, it's going to slow down before it hits the soil. If it goes directly to the soil, it's going to loosen up more soil and cause more erosion. And then when it starts running downhill, if it has to work its way around plants, it's going to slow down. But if there's no plants there, it's going to move faster. It's going to carry away more soil, but also it doesn't get a chance to soak into the soil because it's moving so quickly. And so instead of the water moving into the ground, instead it can flood down in the bottom of the valley. So this is kind of an extreme example where clear cutting led to floods and also soil erosion. Another big problem is we cut down mangrove forests. Mangroves are around the world along the coasts, especially in the warmer areas, not in the colder areas. And they're specialized trees that can keep their roots in the water. Now, roots need oxygen. And so there's oxygen in the soil, but in the water, there's not enough oxygen for most plants. But mangroves can survive with their roots in the water. But people want to make room for coastal developments, or increasingly it's shrimp farming. There's a lot of money to be made in shrimp. So they cut down the mangrove forests and start agriculture. But when those mangrove forests are gone, now there's an increased chance of flooding, especially during storms. Here's an example of Honduras and how much Honduras has changed in 12 years. You can see areas that used to be full of vegetation, no longer like that. And most of this is due to shrimp farming. Another thing that we've done is destroyed wetlands. So here's a picture of China Camp. I don't know if you realize there's China Camp State Park right here in San Rafael, and it has one of the best wetlands in all of North America. It's very well studied because it's such a beautiful example of a wetland. But what we did for years, we thought wetlands were just wasted land. So we filled them in, or we built levees to keep the water out so we could turn it into agricultural land or development. But destroying the wetlands has a very big impact. California has lost 91% of our wetlands. They're very, very productive ecosystems, as productive as a rainforest. And also they protect the coast from flooding. So if storm comes in, and the wetlands would protect the coast. But with the wetlands gone, now all of a sudden the coast is battering that levee or the buildings that you put up there. So overall, the US and Canada has lost 85% of our wetlands. And then, of course, we have climate change. So storms are bigger. And then when you remove the wetlands and the mangroves, now you really have a big chance of flooding when a massive storm hits. Let's change gears and look at water pollution. So first of all, a definition. Water pollution is the addition of any substance that degrades or lowers the quality of the water for living organisms. And so we're going to take a look in class. We'll take a look at this short segment from Last Call at the Oasis about water pollution. Now, you may wonder about tap water. Now, how safe is it? There is the Environmental Working Group. They're a great organization with lots of data. I very much encourage you to go explore this website. But I want you right now to just look at the tap water database. And, oops, my website just got messed up. Sorry. Just a second. There it is. Sorry about that. So here's the website. It's also in your notes. And what I want you to do is take a look at our water, our tap water in San Rafael, 94903 or 94901. And also, I want you to go to Modesto, and there's one of Modesto's zip codes. That's in the Central Valley where we have a lot of agriculture. And I'd like you to look at the results, write it down on the right-hand side. How does the water compare in these two areas? So in Marin, we don't have a lot of agriculture, but in the Central Valley, they do. So let's pause and take a look at two categories of water pollution. So one of them is called a non-point source. So this is runoff. You don't really know where it comes from. So that's why we call it non-point pollution. It's from, let's say, a parking lot. There's oil in the water that runs off the parking lot. It came from cars, but which car did it come from? Water that runs over farmers' fields. There's fertilizer in there, but which field did it come from, or what part of a field? You don't know. So we call it non-point. There's not one point that it came from, originated from. Now that's different from a point source. A point source of pollution is like in this picture. There's a pipe. We can follow that pipe back and we know where that water came from. And if there's any type of pollutant in that water, we know the source of the pollution. So those are two major categories of water pollution. Is it a non-point source or a point source? Obviously, the point sources are a lot easier to deal with. So what are our sources of water pollution? There are infectious agents. So those are things that make people sick, and we're going to talk about those in a moment. Oxygen demanding waste, we will look at that as well. Plant nutrients, we'll also look at that. Those are fertilizers, could also come from sewage, either animal waste or human sewage. There's organic chemicals. So they have carbon. Usually they are made by living things. And then there's inorganic chemicals. So they generally don't contain carbon and not made by living things. So more like made in a laboratory. Sediments, so soil that gets washed away. Heavy metals, also a problem. We'll look at those. And thermal pollution is heat. And finally, plastic. So we're going to pause and look at waterborne diseases. And I want you to realize what a huge problem this is. How many people get sick and how many people die from what should be very preventable. Just usually it's from sewage in the water. And if it makes a person sick, then another one who's drinking the water that waste went into will also catch that same disease. So watch this video, look at the focus question, and write your notes on the right-hand side. Anthropogenic, that means human-caused. Eutrophication. Now, eutrophication is a natural process where water in a lake, it's very clear and there's not a lot of nutrients and life in that lake. And then over time, as more water washes into the lake and brings fertilizer with it, or it could be natural fertilizer, not like plant material and animal waste into the lake starts getting algae blooms and more plants growing. And this is all a very natural process, but humans are making it worse. So we call it anthropogenic, human caused. We are putting a huge amount of nitrogen and phosphorus, and to a certain degree potassium as well, into the water from fertilizer, from animal waste, and human sewage. So watch this video to learn more about anthropogenic eutrophication. A good part of the anthropogenic eutrophication is agricultural pollution. So it's usually animal waste getting into the water. So we're going to watch this in class so you can get an idea of how much of a problem this is, especially with CAFOs, the concentrated animal feeding operations. And you'll see that in the video. So how big of a problem are these hypoxic zones? They're low oxygen zones. It's huge. It's around the world. There are many, many areas, they're in red, where there's low oxygen. That's what hypoxic means, low oxygen in the water. So warm water already holds less oxygen. So, along the equator, there's less oxygen in the water, but we make it worse with eutrophication. So we're going to take a look at what causes that. And we have looked at this briefly, so there should be a review to you. So how does a hypoxic zone happen? First of all, fertilizer or sewage, either animal or human sewage, goes into the water. It's got nitrogen, it's got phosphorus. Those are limiting factors for plants. There's not enough of those. That's why we put them into fertilizer, because there's not enough. So just like fertilizer makes plants on land grow, it also makes plants in the water grow. So it all of a sudden provides that nitrogen and phosphorus that they need. So you get an algae bloom. Algae are little floating plants. So they bloom and they can get really thick on the surface of the water. And then everything eventually dies. And when the algae dies, it sinks to the bottom. Well, then bacteria are just doing their normal decomposition, but because there's so much algae, the bacteria end up using the oxygen in the water as they're decomposing that organic material. And the low oxygen in the water can end up killing fish and crabs and shellfish. Sometimes fish can swim out of the hypoxic zone. But if the hypoxic zone is really large, it'll kill all the fish in the area, or most of them. Now, a way to measure that is what we call the biochemical oxygen demand. Sometimes that's abbreviated to BOD. So it's telling you how much oxygen is needed to decompose the organic material in the water. So if there's a lot of organic material, so maybe it's algae, maybe it's sewage that's gotten into the water, the bacteria are going to start breaking it down, and the bacteria will use up the oxygen in the water as they're decomposing the organic material. So the more organic material in the water, the more oxygen the bacteria need to break it down. So that's what the oxygen demand is. How much oxygen does the bacteria need to break down the organic material? So you can see in this picture, here's a pipe, a point source that is releasing some kind of organic material, chances are sewage, into the water. So as the bacteria are decomposing that organic material, the oxygen level in the water goes down. You can see that on the black line. And eventually it goes back up. Once the bacteria are done decomposing the organic material, the oxygen level can go back up in the water. It recovers a lot faster in a river than in a lake, because rivers, the water's constantly moving, running over rocks, and the organic material gets cleared out. Now, how about coral reefs? What's going on with them? In this picture, you can see a living reef, part of the Great Barrier Reef, with lots of color, lots of fish. And then you can see part of the Great Barrier Reef that has died. So what's happening to coral reefs? Well, there's physical damage. That's due to people building along the coasts, dredging, destructive fishing practices, boat anchors, people stepping on the coral. That kills the coral. And then some people remove coral, which most definitely kills it. But then there's also pollution. So it could be organic material that is causing the oxygen levels to go down, which will kill the fish and the coral. But there's also many chemicals like sunscreen. Believe it or not, you need to be very careful about what sunscreens you wear when you're in the water. So use a physical block, not a chemical block. Ocean acidification, we talked about once before, so this should be a review to you. So carbon dioxide, and we're increasing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it moves by diffusion into the water. So it's actually one of the great sinks for carbon dioxide. A lot of the carbon dioxide we put into the atmosphere has gone into the ocean. But there's a problem with that. When carbon dioxide is with water, and this could be in the atmosphere or in the ocean, it can bond. Some of the carbon dioxide will bond with water molecules to make carbonic acid. And you can see this in this table. And one of the hydrogens can come off of the carbonic acid, and then the molecule is called carbonate. And there it is, CO3 minus. So, and think back to chemistry. Now, what is an acid? An acid has hydrogen ions floating in it. That's what you're measuring, how many hydrogen ions. So when the carbonic acid turns into bicarbonate, it releases a hydrogen ion, and that increases the pH of the ocean. So, if you're looking at the pH scale, the number will go down. And then bicarbonate can lose another hydrogen ion and turn into carbonate. So that carbonate is the HCO2 minus. And that is really important because shellfish take in carbonate, they bond it with calcium, which is floating around in the water. That's what shells are, calcium carbonate. However, as the hydrogen ions that are floating around in the ocean, they are more attracted to the carbonate than is the calcium. So it ends up dissolving the shellfish, and that includes the coral reefs as well. It's not just the shellfish, and including really small floating organisms like zooplankton that have shells, really thin shells that can be dissolved very easily. Another type of chemical is endocrine disruptors. So you're going to watch this part of the video in class. Now, you might be seeing this before or after you've watched that segment of Last Call at the Oasis. But let me tell you what endocrine disruptors are. So in your cells, you have hormone receptors. Hormones are ways that one group of cells can communicate with another group of cells, even though they're far away from each other in the body. So one group of cells will release a hormone, and that gets carried to another group of cells that have a hormone receptor. And that hormone makes the cell do something. So like an example for that is you make growth hormones. And when those growth hormones attach to hormone receptors on your cells, that says divide, and they'll divide. Now, we make some chemicals that mimic hormones, and you can see that in the middle picture, those purple ones. And because they're so similar in size and shape to the hormones, they will interfere. They attach to those hormone receptors and confuse the cells. So those are some chemicals that mimic hormones. So they can make, well, you saw in the video, they can make frogs change sex. So strange, huh? And then there's hormone blockers that will attach to the receptor and just get in the way and prevent the proper hormone from attaching to the cell receptor. So we have both hormone mimics and hormone blockers, but either one of them are what we call endocrine disruptors. So your endocrine system is all the hormones that you make in your body. And anything that disrupts those hormones from doing their job, whether it's a mimic or a blocker, either one is going to cause problems. Now here's a list from the UN of endocrine disrupting chemicals. There's a lot of them. And some chemicals can bioaccumulate. So here's a video about the bioaccumulation and biomagnification of one chemical, DDT. And I showed this to you once before, so this should be a repeat for you. Certain chemicals are called persistent organic pollutants. Persistent because they last a long time in the environment. So some of them are synthetic, so man-made, and they're carbon-based. And they all are persistent in the environment, so they don't break down. They can last for hundreds of years. And a lot of them tend to bioaccumulate, especially if they dissolve in fats. And then they're accumulating in one body, but then they biomagnify up the food chain. So the top predators will have much higher amounts of these chemicals. And some of them can travel long distances around the world, and even areas that are very pristine with very few people in them can have these chemicals because they last so long. They get a chance to move all over the planet. So some examples of these: DDT, which you saw in the video, PCBs, and another chemical, PFOAs, which are also sometimes called C8. Those are in Teflon. So if you have Teflon pans, you might want to reconsider those. 181 countries have banned PFOAs as of May of 2019. Another type of pollution is sediment pollution. So when you watch this video, read the focus question and write your notes on the right-hand side. Heavy metal pollution is a big problem, especially with mining. So I've got 2 videos for you to watch here. Read the focus question and then write your notes. And keep that focus question in mind as you're watching these. Thermal pollution. This is heat pollution. Science seems like how can you think of heat as a pollutant? But it really is. Usually this is from power plants. The water's withdrawn to cool the power plant and then put back into a river or a lake. But when it goes back, it's warmer. Plastics are yet another type of pollutant. So in the link, you can watch this video about the Pacific Gyre. So all of the plastic that is accumulating in the Pacific. Another type of plastic you may not be aware of is microbeads. And because they're so small, they readily get into our water sources. So rivers, lakes, the ocean. So take a look at this video. Now, the United States went through some pretty severe problems that made us wake up to the pollution that we're causing. So there were a couple of things that happened that really made the public realize we need to change. So from the Industrial Revolution all the way through the 60s, water pollution was just seen as a necessary consequence. If you're going to grow with population and industry, then, oh well, there's going to be some pollution. But in 1969, the Cuyahoga River in Ohio caught fire. It was so polluted with oil on the surface that the surface of the water actually caught fire. And that was a big wake-up call for the US public. And by 1972, 2/3 of US lakes, rivers, and coasts were unsafe for swimming and fishing. And that's when people demanded change. So in the 1970s were an amazing decade for legislation that helped protect the environment. So the Clean Water Act is one of those critically important pieces of legislation. It was passed in 1977, and it set allowable limits for different pollutants in surface waters. It doesn't cover groundwater. So any point source, remember that's where you can identify exactly where it comes from, may not discharge pollution into a river or lake without a permit or into the ocean. So they've got to have a permit. And when we go on a field trip to the water treatment facility and we go into their lab, you'll hear about their permits. And states are required to have a list of what they call impaired waters. Those are areas that are too polluted or degraded to meet water quality standards. And sometimes you'll hear about that. They run the tests and you will hear about them in the news. Like they'll close beaches, they're too polluted to swim. All right, you are done. So I will see you back in class. Make sure you submit your paper on Canvas.